Good morning, Central Texas. Welcome to KISS Community Connections at 103.1 KISS FM. I'm Phyllis Jones, your host for this morning. And you all know I have a heat issue coming. I'm the one that likes 40-degree weathers, and this 90 degrees is getting on my nerves. So yeah, we somehow or another, we're going to have to bring some 40s back to Texas. I know that's impossible, but that's what I want. You know, this morning we're going to talk to a very interesting person, someone who's going to talk about a lot of things that we're missing and the missing information that's out there that we don't have, but we need to have it. I heard him on a, one of my friends has a radio talk show, and he was on there, and I was taking so many notes, I was forgetting exactly to ask questions. I think I asked maybe one or two, but I was busy taking notes. I'm like, man, I didn't get to ask this question, you know. So now he's on the phone, and we're going to talk to him, and I can actually ask the questions I was trying to ask that night because I was taking notes. But his name is Carlton Myers. Good morning, Carlton. How are you?
Good morning, Phyllis. I'm doing well. How you doing?
Well. You know, I'm not liking this Texas heat. It's not cool.
Well, I'm over here enjoying the mid-Atlantic weather. I'm in Maryland, right outside of D.C., so it's quite nice today.
See, you didn't have to say Maryland because, you know, I love Maryland. I like the food there and the people
and the old bit.
Yes, I like it. We need to bring some of that to Texas a little bit there. But can you let us know about your company and what you do?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I want to say thank you for having me on your show today. Very appreciative for that, and to have the opportunity to talk about my company and the work that I'm doing to support communities around the country in criminal justice reform advocacy. So the name of my company is Mayor Strategic Solutions, right. LLC. It was founded in 2018 this year, and it empowers communities to identify, strategize, and initiate national evidence-based best practices on state and local criminal justice reform. My company does this by consulting with community-based organizations and other community stakeholders on state and local criminal justice reform advocacy in areas such as policing reform, prosecutorial reform, court reform, sentencing reform, reentry reform, and gun violence prevention and reduction in urban communities.
That's a
Based
whole
on my
lot.
10 years of experience as a social justice and policy advocate and co-author of NAACP's One Suspect Racial Profiling Report, I provide policy and legislative research, analysis, and writing on state and local criminal justice reform. Additionally, my experiences directing NAACP National Office's Criminal Justice Program and working in NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund's Policing Reform Campaign involve training communities in over 30 states across the U.S. on criminal justice reform advocacy. Some of these communities include Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, Maryland, North Charleston, South Carolina, and New York City. I strive to continue to empower communities. Excuse me. I want to I strive to continue through my company, Mayor Strategic Solutions, to continue to empower communities through presentations, trainings, and facilitation of strategy sessions on evidence-based solutions and best practices for criminal justice reform. And most importantly, I want to emphasize this, Mayor Strategic Solutions LLC provides a custom, tailored approach. So that means it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's every community that I engage, I make sure that the work that I'm bringing, the tools, the resources that I bring to the table is custom tailored for that specific community based on its heritage, its culture, its history, and on its current circumstances, laws, and policies. And Mayor Strategic Solutions LLC collaborates and partners with other community stakeholders on advancing criminal justice reform in communities. So that's my company, and just got started up a couple of months ago, and already have a lot of community members engaging me on working with them on these issues.
You're talking like 3 or 4 of my shows. Okay, let's go. Let's talk about I guess the hot point now is the criminal justice reform. And I don't know if you know, in 2016, in Dallas, Texas newspaper, in April, they said that our state, Bell County, was one of the most highest states who put bonds on people and know they couldn't afford it. And that's ridiculous for our county to be to be like that, but it is that way. And I guess it's because of our non-criminal justice reform. And also the fact that we're being stopped more and I guess targeted more by the police. What could we do and work with you to kind of fix some of that?
Well, it's interesting you're talking about the Dallas Police Department, correct?
No, well, the Dallas paper put out the article on our county, Bell County.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they put out on our county, specifically us. Well, it was across Texas, but Bell County was like the highest.
And so you're saying that the local publication put out information on traffic stops or use of force?
On traffic stops and the fact that we have the highest amount of indigent people being on high bonds and knowing they can't afford to pay them.
Oh, okay. Well, I can tell you, at least when it comes to policing reform, right now the service that Main Strategic Solutions LLC is providing is the working with communities on developing strategies and goals and implementing them through the 21st Century Policing Community Action Card Deck. Now, just to give you some background on what that is, I know people are kind of like, well, what's
the card deck?
I've never heard of it. Well, okay. What it is that back in 2016, myself, on behalf of NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and representatives from other national civil rights organizations,
right,
collaborated with President Obama's administration to develop the 21st Century Policing Task Force Report Community Action Card Deck, or what we like to call the card deck. The purpose of the card deck is to empower community members by assisting them in identifying, strategizing, and implementing evidence-based best practices on policing reform to restore their confidence and trust in their police. The card deck also connects community members to resources and real-world examples of how these actions have successfully been implemented around the country. There are 30 action cards within the Community Action Card Deck that are based on the recommendations and action items in President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force final report and the implementation guide, which was both the report and the implementation guide were published in 2015. And the implementation guide provides detailed information on implementing the recommendations and action items that are highlighted in the 21st Century Policing Task Force final report. Now, the action cards can be used creatively. There's actually a process, a methodology that's provided within the action cards. And they can either be passed around, shuffled, ordered, reordered, or even taken home as an assignment. Most importantly, like I said, there's a process to facilitate the dialogue among members of the community to establish and implement those policing reform goals. The card deck also includes template cards. In other words, cards that are blank that community members can, on their own, say, well, these are solutions to problems that we're having in our community that are not on any of the 30 cards that are established. And so you can create your own card with your own solutions on it and include that in the strategy session. So that way, at the end of the session, that can be one of the goals that's laid out with a strategy on how you're going to accomplish that goal. And just to let everybody know, so when we worked on the Community Action Card Deck, it was finalized in December of 2016. And so the card deck is actually already publicized and available to the public. The General Services Administration website, that's one of the U.S. federal agencies. And you can go on there, download the cards, and actually conduct your own card deck strategy session in your community, just using information that's provided on the cards on how to facilitate those conversations.
What's the website for people to download the cards?
The website is, I can give you the exact website, which might be kind of hard for people to see. What I would recommend is instead of looking up the website, to just Google proper keywords. And so I would say if you go on Google, Bing, or Yahoo as a search engine or any other search engine online, you can just put in the keywords 21st Century Policing Community Action Card Deck. So once again, the keywords to put in a search engine to look up the card deck are 21st Century Policing Community Action Card Deck. And then just click on the link, and it'll take you directly to the web page where the cards are, and you can download it right off the web.
Okay.
But just to give you an example on how these cards can be used, I know you talked about how your local publication within the state of Texas, I believe out of Dallas,
right,
provided some information on what's going on with policing activities in your county, in Bell County.
Right.
Well, that's actually a good example of how the cards are meant to be used. And so there is one of the 30 cards in the deck relates to data collection, analysis, and public reporting of police-civilian encounters, which includes traffic stops, pedestrian stops, arrests, detentions, citations, warnings, searches and seizures, and I would say also includes use of force and civilian complaints. And what it's calling for is that, typically community members are trying to get this information from law enforcement because it's a fact that they all collect them.
Right.
It's just that instead of providing that information to the public, they tend to keep it in-house. And the fact of the matter is that the public owns the data because the public, we're the ones who are paying, taxes, which are funding and subsidizing law enforcement officers and their pensions. And so anything that they do as a state agent or a public agent should be made available to the public to be aware of and have access to that information. And so the public's always calling for law enforcement departments to provide this information either on their website or even, a publication that they can have access to in a public library or at the police department or city hall so that they can see what's going on with these traffic stops and use of force.
Right.
See what the race is of the individuals who are being stopped or who are victims of use of force by law enforcement. See what the gender is of these individuals and the age. So that way you have a sense of what the situation is, and you also have some clarity on what the problems are. And, as we know, you cannot solve a problem until you have first identified the problem.
Correct.
In order to solve a problem, you have to first know what it is. And so that's why it's so important to get this information. Now, the Community Action Card Deck, because law enforcement is typically very reluctant to provide that information and to provide it in a way where it's easy to see what the situation is. Instead of doing that, community members can now, using these cards, actually be in touch with their local paper or other media outlet who's already doing their own investigative reporting on police-civilian encounters, and then be in touch with a local academic institution, like a college or university. They typically have researchers there who either have grants to do this kind of work, or
right.
a lot of times they will analyze the data that you provide them, which is from the news publication. They'll do that for free a lot of times just because this is something that they have a passion for, and they want to do some work on it. And so if you do that, you can actually, as a community member, using the services within your community, being the local media and also academic institutions, you can not only have access to the data through the news media, but then you can analyze that data through the academic institution, take those findings from the analysis, and then use that as a community member to bring about change through action. When I say action, I mean actually engaging your law enforcement department with facts
right.
about why they need to reform their policies. You can also engage your lawmakers and other government officials on why they need to implement certain initiatives and laws so that way, and enforce laws so that way these kind of actions do not continue going forward.
Okay, I have
there is a card that actually has questions that lay out and walk you through a strategy on how you can implement what I just talked about when it comes to data collection, analysis, and public reporting of police-civilian encounters.
Okay, I'm going to mention the case to you, and then we might be calling you for help with it, but I want to tell you the case. In May of 2014, African-American male, his name is Marvin Gaye, the police did a no-knock warrant to his house. And when they did a no-knock warrant, they entered his his actual bedroom window, and they were told, they were given the wrong diagram of his apartment by somebody who, you know, was helping the police turn him in. But anyway, they broke into his bedroom window, and he started shooting. You know, he started shooting. He killed one cop, and he wounded one cop in the knee. So he got charged with capital murder. But this is 2017 of May, and he hasn't went to court yet. He's not had a court date, nothing. And we know this, and we're following this. So what can we, the community, do to find out what the holdup is? Who do we talk to? What do we do? I know his lawyers, so I've talked to his lawyers, and they've said that their problem is the police department giving them the information that they need, and the district attorney's office isn't really assisting them. So as the public, what can we do?
Well, as a member of the public, the first thing I would ask is, what's your relationship with your local police chief, your lawmakers, being like city council members, right, the mayor's office, and also your relationship with the local district attorney? Because sometimes, you know, depending on your relationship with them, you can a lot of times address these kind of situations through a meeting.
Right.
And that way you can get more information from them. Because even though their attorney is saying one thing, the individual who's incarcerated is saying one thing, the government might have a different perspective on it, or maybe there's more information.
Okay.
But the fact of the matter is that something else that needs to be considered, which is why this is, like a member said, everything has to be custom tailored, is that I have to, or anybody would have to consider what the laws are for that particular jurisdiction.
Okay.
And the practices, and then see, according to, you know, what's already established and been established over time, where there's room for change, and also looking at what changes have already been made and what changes are underway. If it's through legislation, if it's through some kind of a policy reform that's being implemented. So, you know, I would have to get more information in order to really provide you with an adequate answer on that one. But all I can say is that really, and this is the whole point of using these cards, and I do want to provide a little bit more information so that way you can get an idea as to why these cards are so important to be used right now and how they're meant to be used. And so, just to give you some background, so the 21st Century Policing Task Force Final Report, which is what these cards are based on, that was so in 2014, President Obama issued an executive order creating an 11-member task force on 21st century policing, which consisted of academics, law enforcement officials, civil rights activists, to respond to a number of serious incidents between police and communities they serve and protect. In 2015, the task force produced a publication on policing reform to begin the process of healing and restoring community trust in police. Now, the final report that I mentioned earlier, like that the cards are based on, those recommendations are 59 recommendations that are within that report and 92 action items, which are meant for law enforcement, the government, school systems, and local communities to use to bring about change within policing in their community. Now, those action items span across 6 pillars of policing reform. Those are 6 different areas that, according to the Obama administration, are the different areas of focus for policing reform. One being building trust and legitimacy. That has to do with what we just talked about, data collection, analysis, and public reporting of that information. Policy and oversight, also what we talked about. Policy reform, to make sure that law enforcement is doing what they're supposed to do. And if they don't, they're making sure that they're being held accountable for it. Technology and social media, which is like body-worn cameras, footage, and using the internet to inform individuals, like I mentioned earlier, about providing information via the website on the police department. Community policing and crime reduction, and that has to do with problem solving, like engaging community members on how to address these issues, which is what you and I just talked about when it comes to pretrial detention and bail reform, which is the subject that you were bringing up. You know, how can the community, through engagement of law enforcement, work on addressing those issues? And not only reducing crime, which of course at the end of the day is the focus of public safety, but also how can we end and not encourage mass incarceration. And then we also have training and education. which is something else that I want to talk about. We'll talk about a bit later. And officer wellness and safety, which has to do with how can community members assist law enforcement with feeling safer while they're on duty. So that way they don't feel the need to always shoot first, ask questions later. Now, each card is assigned a specific color based on each of the pillars. And so like the cards look like an Uno card deck in that way.
Okay.
And so, I just want to kind of give a bit more background because then it's going to bring more clarity as to how the cards can be used, even to address the situation that you just brought up in your county, in your jurisdiction.
Right.
Through community engagement of the community service providers in your community and by engaging lawmakers and your local police department.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Now the task force that you talked about that past President Obama created, does all that still exist now?
The task force does not, because the whole point of the task force was to generate the task force report,
right,
which was published in 2015. So the task force, their job is done, and it does not exist anymore. However, the report that they produce can still be found on the internet with a simple Google search. And I do want to say that I think it's good that you raised that question because, as you know, and as a lot of us know, there's obviously been a change in policy toward criminal justice reform from the federal government since the change in administration from the Obama administration to the current Trump administration. As we know, the current president and his administration, including the Attorney General Sessions from the DOJ, they have a different approach to policing reform and criminal justice reform. They're focusing on tough-on-crime policies, which is actually what led to mass incarceration,
right?
And the war on drugs, that also fed into locking up, especially African Americans, within federal, state, and local incarceration facilities throughout the country. And as we know, looking at the most recent incident in Sacramento from Stephon Clark, where we had an unarmed African American who was in the back of his grandmother's house and was shot down with 20 rounds while he was unarmed. Very evident from looking at the president's response to that, which was that this is a local matter that should be addressed by local authorities. That has shown us, that to me was the nail in the coffin to the world and to the community, especially here in America, that you cannot rely on federal intervention when it comes to addressing police misconduct. And so now the onus or the responsibility is on community members themselves to be able to hold their law enforcement accountable when they engage in misconduct. And that's where the 21st Century Policing Task Force Report Community Action Card Deck comes in handy, because it empowers community members to be able to identify, strategize, and initiate those best practices in their community. And that's what we need right now, because you can't rely on Obama to come and save the day anymore.
Right. You
have to do it yourself. And, the Obama administration, they say that when it comes to policing reform, they have a philosophy called the three-legged stool approach, meaning that the three legs of a stool when it comes to policing reform. One leg is the police department. The other leg is the government, and that can be the local government. It can be school district, if we're talking about police and schools. And then you have the community, is the third leg. And so when we're saying that the police department and the government are not there to support the community on policing reform, or even support each other on policing reform, then now the responsibility is on the community to use its power to bring about that reform, if it's in collaboration with the government and police department, or if it's independent of them. And we're seeing that in communities throughout the country. You see some communities that have taken on an approach of policing themselves, by for instance, monitoring police enforcement activities in their community through a program called Cop Watch, which is where they use their smartphones to video record and audio record police enforcement activities, and then they post that on the internet. And that the community shares, like a Facebook page or a website, so that way they are informed on not only what the police department is doing in their community, but who from their police department is engaging in police misconduct in the community. Because obviously, not every officer is doing this. I mean, it's a fact that most police officers are not bad seeds. It's only like the minority of them who actually are engaging misconduct on an ongoing basis. But the problem is that those who are engaging misconduct on an ongoing basis, if they're not being held liable and accountable for their actions, then the other officers who may not initially want to engage in those activities, they're going to be more likely to do that because they're seeing, just like a lot of people, when you see somebody do something that they're not supposed to do and they get away with it and they're doing it all the time,
right?
It's going to encourage you to be like, well, why can't I do that every now and then? And even if you do engage in it or something that's not as severe, you're going to feel that, well, you can't hold me accountable for doing this because this other individual does stuff a lot worse than I do, and they're never held accountable for it, right?
Right.
So it encourages the wrong type of behavior within police departments and within communities. And in order to stop that, you need to not only change policy, but also and change laws. We also need to change the culture. And in order to change any culture, you have to change the way of thinking that people have about themselves and about their environment that they engage. And that's what these cards do. They allow community members to have the power to change not only policy and laws, most importantly, the culture of their police departments, their sheriff's offices. So that way, when they engage each other, you don't have white officers engaging black officers as if they're like a separate species.
Right.
They're engaging them, understanding that they have a lived experience that's different than their own, and that needs to be acknowledged and needs to be addressed in a certain way with how they engage them. By doing that with their own officers in-house, that's going to only encourage them to do that with community members who look like those officers. And that's going to encourage the officers who look like those community members to not feel as if they need to abide by the blue wall or the blue code and allow, white officers to engage in discriminatory policing practices like stop and frisk, other racial profiling practices. That instead, no, we are going to hold each other to a higher standard. We don't treat each other like that in the police department, and we definitely are not going to treat community members that we're here to serve and protect like that. So, and that's what it's about. I mean, my philosophy is that if you want to change culture, you have to change the environment. You have to make it from an environment that's comfortable for people who engage in misconduct to an environment that's inhospitable to officers who are engaging in misconduct. It's the same thing you would do if you have a foreign agent like a bacteria in your blood system. What does your body do? Your white blood cells, if they're T cells or B cells, they are then stimulated to engage with that foreign agent in a way to make the environment around it inhospitable. So that way it cannot exist in that environment. And that's even when you're talking about dealing with like weeds, like let's say that you're dealing with your garden,
right,
and you see you have a bunch of weeds in it. How do you get rid of the weeds? To make sure that they stay away.
Right, that's true.
You have to change the environment, right?
That's right.
Right. You have to apply certain things to that environment so that that environment is not hospitable for the weeds to grow in it, so that it's only hospitable for the plants that you want to see to grow in it, being the plants that are not going to invade and take over the whole area. They're going to allow for other plants to grow and be fruitful and productive. And that's what we want in police departments. We want to see good officers
right,
who are doing the job the way the community wants to see it done. We want to see them get rewarded. We want to see them get acknowledged. We want to see them receive praise and accolades and change the image of law enforcement, not only in the community, but in the whole country and the world. And at the same time, the officers who are not engaging in proper misconduct, we need to also publicize their punishment, being that they're not only fired, not only held criminally liable, civilly liable, but that They also are not able to be a police officer again at any police department in America, meaning that they get decertified. They lose their license to be a law enforcement officer.